The wind howled across the frozen tundra, whipping snowflakes into sharp spirals that danced like ghosts before disappearing into the endless white expanse. Deep within this icy wilderness stood a facility unlike any other, a high-security penitentiary, designed not just to hold criminals but also to experiment on them. It was a place where hope went to die, hidden away from prying eyes by miles of barren land and bitter cold. Lila Dawson stepped out of the armored transport vehicle, pulling her coat tighter around herself as she took in the sight of the massive structure looming ahead. The building was stark and utilitarian, its gray walls blending almost seamlessly with the overcast sky. Steel bars covered every window, and thick coils of razor wire crowned the perimeter fence. Armed guards patrolled the area, their breath visible in the freezing air as they moved with practiced precision. This was Lila's new assignment, evaluating the mental health of inmates housed in what many called the frozen cage. Officially, it was known as Black Ridge Penitentiary, though few outside the government even knew it existed. To most people, it was just another black site buried under layers of secrecy. But to Lila, it represented both a challenge and an opportunity. She had been chosen for this role because of her exceptional skills as a psychologist. Her colleagues often praised her ability to connect with even the most hardened individuals, finding ways to break through their defenses and uncover truths others couldn't see. Yet, despite her confidence, Lila couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her chest as she walked toward the main entrance. Something about this place felt off. Inside, the temperature rose slightly, but the chill remained. The corridors were lined with steel walls painted a dull beige, and the floors were made of rough concrete. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting harsh, unflattering illumination over everything. Everywhere she looked, there were signs of control: security cameras mounted at regular intervals, electronic locks on every door, and armed guards stationed strategically throughout the building. As Lila followed her escort deeper into the facility, she noticed the stares. Inmates pressed their faces against the narrow windows of their cells, watching her with a mix of curiosity and hostility. Some muttered insults under their breath, while others simply observed in silence, their expressions unreadable. Lila kept her gaze steady, refusing to show fear or discomfort. She knew these men were testing her, trying to gauge whether she was weak or strong. Her first stop was the warden's office, where she met Victor Holt, a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. His demeanor was polite but distant, and there was an air of authority about him that demanded respect. He greeted her warmly enough, offering her coffee and explaining the basics of her duties. "Your job is simple," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Evaluate the inmates, assess their mental states, and provide recommendations for rehabilitation." But as Lila listened, she couldn't help noticing the subtle undertones in his words. There was something unsaid, something lurking beneath the surface. When she asked about the nature of the experiments conducted here, Holt deflected her questions with vague answers. "Nothing you need to worry about," he assured her. "Just focus on your work, and you'll do fine." After leaving the warden's office, Lila was led to a smaller room where she would conduct her sessions. It was sparsely furnished, with only a table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. The guard who accompanied her handed her a folder containing profiles of several inmates, then left her alone to prepare. The first inmate brought in was Ryan Carter. He was a large man, easily 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and muscles that strained against the fabric of his orange jumpsuit. Tattoos covered his arms, intricate designs that told stories of violence and rebellion. His dark hair was cropped, short, and his piercing green eyes seemed to bore into her soul as he entered the room. Ryan didn't bother sitting down immediately. Instead, he stood near the door, arms crossed, sizing her up. Lila remained seated, keeping her expression neutral. "Please have a seat, Mr. Carter," she said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from her. For a moment he hesitated, then finally complied, lowering himself onto the chair with deliberate slowness. His movements were calculated, each one meant to convey dominance. "So you're the shrink?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Yes, Lila replied, opening the folder in front of her. I'm here to talk to you, to understand what's going on in your mind. Ryan chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. You think you can figure me out? Lady, you don't know the first thing about me. Then why don't you tell me? Lila countered, meeting his gaze without flinching. Their conversation started off tense, with Ryan deflecting her questions and making sarcastic comments. But as time passed, Lila began to chip away at his defenses, asking pointed questions that forced him to confront parts of himself he'd rather forget. Just as she thought she was making progress, something unexpected happened. When Lila turned her back momentarily to retrieve additional notes from her bag, Ryan lunged forward, grabbing her wrist tightly. His grip was firm, almost painful, and his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. You think you can fix us? You don't belong here. For a split second, fear flashed across Lila's face. But then something remarkable occurred. Her expression shifted, hardening into one of quiet authority. Without raising her voice or struggling, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "Let go now, or regret it later." Ryan froze, caught off guard by her sudden change in demeanor. For someone so petite and seemingly fragile, she radiated an aura of strength that made him hesitate. After a beat, he released her wrist, confusion written all over his face. Lila didn't address the incident directly. Instead, she continued the session as if nothing had happened, maintaining her composure throughout. But deep down, she knew that Ryan's actions had set something in motion. Whether he realized it or not, he had crossed a line, and now he would have to deal with the consequences. As the day wore on, Lila found herself replaying the encounter in her mind. Who was Ryan Carter, really? And more importantly, who did he think she was? Little did either of them know, their lives were about to become intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. The days following the session with Ryan Carter passed slowly for Lila Dawson. She went about her routine, conducting evaluations with various inmates, jotting down notes and trying to maintain an air of professionalism. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her mind kept drifting back to that moment when Ryan had grabbed her wrist. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her afterward, like he was seeing her for the first time. Ryan, too, couldn't shake the memory. He replayed it over and over in his head, analyzing every detail. Who was this woman? Sure, she seemed harmless enough at first glance. Petite, soft-spoken, and dressed more like a school teacher than someone who belonged in a maximum security prison. But there was something else beneath the surface. Something dangerous. When she'd told him to let go, her voice hadn't wavered. It wasn't a plea or a cry for help, it was a command. And the look in her eyes, it was almost as if she knew something he didn't. Determined to find answers, Ryan began paying closer attention to Lila during their sessions. He noticed little things, the way she never flinched when inmates shouted insults, the calm authority in her tone, the subtle shifts in her body language whenever certain topics came up. Most people would have dismissed these observations as meaningless, but Ryan wasn't most people. He had spent years honing his instincts, learning to read people like open books, and everything he saw told him that Lila Dawson was hiding something. One evening, after another grueling day of interviews, Ryan decided to take matters into his own hands. While the rest of the inmates were locked in their cells, he slipped out of his bunk and crept toward the administrative wing. It was risky. Guards patrolled the corridors at all hours, but Ryan had memorized their schedules weeks ago. Timing his movements carefully, he avoided detection and reached the door leading to the restricted area. Inside, the room was cluttered with filing cabinets, computer terminals, and stacks of paperwork. Ryan moved quickly, rifling through drawers and folders until he found what he was looking for. A thick envelope labeled Classified HELIX Program. His heart raced as he opened it and began scanning the contents. What he discovered left him stunned. The documents revealed that Lila wasn't just a psychologist. She was part of a top-secret government initiative called HELIX, which trained operatives to manipulate neural pathways and control minds. According to the files, she possessed advanced abilities far beyond anything Ryan had ever encountered. These skills allowed her to influence thoughts, erase memories, and even incapacitate individuals with minimal effort. At first, Ryan felt a surge of anger. Was she here to spy on them? To experiment on them further? But as he read deeper, he realized the truth was more complicated. The program itself was shrouded in controversy, with allegations of unethical practices and forced participation. Some, operatives like Lila, had been coerced into joining under threat of imprisonment or worse. Others had simply disappeared, their fates unknown. Armed with this knowledge, Ryan returned to his cell, his mind racing. He needed to confront Lila, to demand answers, but he also knew he had to tread carefully. If she really did have the powers described in those files, she could crush him without breaking a sweat. The next day, during their scheduled session, Ryan wasted no time getting to the point. As soon as they were alone, he leaned forward and said, "I know who you are." Lila's pen paused mid-stroke, but she didn't look up. "Do you?" she replied evenly, her voice betraying nothing. "Don't play dumb," Ryan snapped. "I saw the files. You're part of some secret program. What are you doing here? Are you spying on us? Experimenting on us?" Finally, Lila raised her head, meeting his gaze with a mixture of resignation and defiance. "And what if I am?" she asked quietly. "What will you do about it?" Ryan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. "You lied. To me. To all of us." "No," Lila corrected him firmly. "I never lied. I simply didn't tell you the whole truth. There's a difference." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then reluctantly, Ryan leaned back in his chair, his anger giving way to curiosity. "Fine. So why are you here? What's your real mission?" Lila hesitated, weighing her options. Finally, she sighed and said, "Officially, I'm here to evaluate the inmates and provide recommendations for rehabilitation. Unofficially," she trailed off, glancing at the camera mounted in the corner before lowering her voice, "let's just say I'm starting to question whether this place deserves saving." Ryan frowned, unsure whether to believe her. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," Lila admitted. "But if you dig any deeper, you'll put yourself and everyone else in danger. Trust me when I say you don't want to know everything." Her warning only fueled Ryan's determination. Over the next few days, he became obsessed with uncovering more about the facility and its dark secrets. He started eavesdropping on conversations between guards, piecing together fragments of information. He learned about failed experiments, mysterious disappearances, and whispered rumors of entire wings being wiped clean after catastrophic incidents. Meanwhile, strange occurrences began plaguing the prison. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation, security cameras glitched at odd intervals, and several guards reported feeling watched even when alone. Rumors spread among the inmates that the building was haunted, though Ryan suspected otherwise. Everything pointed to one conclusion: someone or something was tampering with the system. Lila, too, noticed the changes. At first, she thought, it might be coincidence, but as the anomalies grew more frequent, she realized it wasn't random. Someone was deliberately sabotaging the facility, and given the timing, she couldn't help wondering if Ryan was involved. During their next session, she confronted him directly. "What are you planning?" she asked, her tone sharp. Ryan smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Planning? Me? Why would I plan anything?" "Don't play games with me," Lila warned. "I know you've been snooping around. If you're thinking about causing trouble, you need to stop. Now." "And why is that?" Ryan challenged. "Because you're afraid I'll expose your precious program? Or because you're scared I'll figure out what you're really hiding?" Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Whatever game Ryan was playing, it was clear he wasn't going to back down anytime soon. That night, as Lila reviewed her notes in her quarters, she found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she admired Ryan's tenacity and resourcefulness. On the other, She feared what might happen if he pushed too far. The truth about Black Ridge Penitentiary was dangerous, not just for the inmates, but for anyone who dared to challenge the system. Unbeknownst to either of them, events were already spiraling out of control. In the shadows, forces were gathering, preparing to strike. And when the storm finally broke, neither Ryan nor Lila would emerge unchanged. As dawn approached, Lila stared out the window at the endless expanse of snow-covered wilderness. Somewhere out there lay freedom, a concept that felt increasingly distant with each passing day. Yet despite the odds stacked against them, she couldn't shake the feeling that change was coming. Whether it would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. Ryan Carter wasn't used to asking for help. In fact, he prided himself on being self-reliant, a trait that had served him well during his time in Black Ridge Penitentiary. But as he sat alone in his cell late one night, poring over the classified documents he'd stolen, he realized this was bigger than him. If he wanted to expose the truth about the facility, and maybe even escape, he'd need allies. The next morning, during breakfast in the communal dining hall, Ryan approached Marcus and Dylan. Marcus was a wiry man with sharp features and quick reflexes, while Dylan was built like a tank, with fists that could crush bone. Both men were serving long sentences, but more importantly, both had reasons to hate the system. "I need your help," Ryan said bluntly, keeping his voice low so only they could hear. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "Taking down this place," Ryan replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Marcus exchanged a glance with Dylan before nodding slowly. "What's the plan?" Over the next few days, Ryan outlined their strategy. Using blueprints he'd memorized from the administrative files and information gleaned from eavesdropping on staff conversations, they mapped out a route to breach the outer perimeter. Their goal was simple: reach the main control room, disable the security systems, and make a run for freedom. But there was a problem: Lila Dawson. Ryan knew she suspected something was up. She'd been watching him closely during their sessions, probing his thoughts with unnerving precision. If she decided to interfere, their chances of success would plummet. One evening, after another tense session, Ryan cornered Lila in the corridor outside the interview room. "We're getting out of here," he said without preamble. Lila folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "And you expect me to just let you walk away?" "No," Ryan admitted. "I expect you to help us." Lila laughed bitterly. "Why would I do that? You think I owe you something?" "You owe everyone in this hellhole something," Ryan shot back. "You're part of the program that made this place what it is. So either you help us bring it down or you can rot here with the rest of them." For a moment, Lila didn't respond. Then, to Ryan's surprise, she nodded. "Fine. But if we're doing this, we do it my way." With Lila's reluctant assistance, the group finalized their plan. They decided to strike during the midnight shift change, when the guards were most vulnerable and the corridors least crowded. Lila provided crucial intel about the layout of the facility and the locations of key security checkpoints, while Ryan coordinated the team's movements. On the night of the escape, the tension was palpable. Ryan, Marcus, and Dylan gathered in the shadows near the laundry room waiting for Lila's signal. When she finally appeared, moving silently through the dimly lit corridor, they followed her without a word. Their first stop was the server room, where they hoped to disable the surveillance cameras and unlock the main gates. As Ryan worked the terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard, Lila kept watch, her eyes darting toward every sound. Marcus and Dylan stood guard at the door, their muscles taut with anticipation. It was then that things started to go wrong. Dylan, growing impatient, muttered under his breath, "This is taking too long. Let's just smash the damn thing and get out of here." "No," Lila hissed, turning to glare at him. "If you damage the equipment, the alarms will go off. We need to be smart about this." But Dylan wasn't listening. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a nearby wrench and swung it at the nearest server. Sparks flew as the machine short-circuited, and within seconds, the room was flooded with flashing red lights and blaring sirens. "Idiot," Ryan shouted, shoving Dylan back. "Now we've got company." Sure enough, the sound of boots pounding against the concrete grew louder as guards rushed toward their location. Lila cursed under her breath, her calm facade cracking. "We have to move now!" They bolted from the server room, racing down the corridor as shouts echoed behind them. Guards appeared around the corner, weapons drawn, but Lila raised her hand and a pulse of energy surged through the air. The guards collapsed, unconscious, leaving the path clear. For now. Ryan stared at her wide-eyed. What the hell was that? No time to explain, Lila snapped, already sprinting ahead. Keep moving. They reached the main control room moments later, barricading the door behind them. Inside, banks of monitors displayed live feeds of the entire facility, revealing swarms of guards converging on their position. "We're trapped," Marcus said, panic creeping into his voice. "No, we're not," Lila countered, sliding into the chair in front of the main console. Her fingers danced over the keys, bypassing firewalls and overriding security protocols. "I can shut down the perimeter defenses, but it'll take a minute." As she worked, Dylan paced nervously, clutching the wrench like a lifeline. "This is insane," he muttered. "We're never going to make it out alive." "Shut up, Dylan," Ryan growled. "If you don't want to die, stay focused." But Dylan wasn't listening. His fear turned to desperation, and before anyone could react, he lunged at Lila, grabbing her by the shoulder. "Stop messing around and get us out of here." Lila twisted free, her eyes blazing with fury. Without hesitation, she placed a hand on his chest, and a surge of energy coursed through him. Dylan staggered backward, gasping for air, before collapsing to the floor unconscious. Marcus and Ryan stared at her, stunned. "What did you just do?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He'll live," Lila said curtly, returning her attention to the console. "But next time, don't question me." Finally, with a triumphant click, the system rebooted and the monitors went dark. The perimeter defenses were down. "Go," Lila ordered, standing up. "I'll hold them off." Ryan hesitated, torn between gratitude and suspicion. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Lila replied simply. "Now go." Without another word, Ryan and Marcus bolted from the control room, leaving Lila behind. As they emerged into the freezing night air, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them. Lila had bought them their chance at freedom, but at what cost? Standing alone in the chaos, Lila braced herself for whatever came next. She knew the consequences of her actions would follow her wherever she went. But for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could still make a difference. As Ryan and Marcus disappeared into the snowy wilderness, Lila whispered to herself, "Good luck." The cold air hit Ryan Carter like a slap as he burst through the heavy steel door leading outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots and the biting wind stung his cheeks, but he didn't stop running. Marcus followed close behind, both men pushing themselves harder than ever before. They could hear shouts and gunfire echoing from inside the facility, growing fainter with every step they took. But even as they fled, Ryan couldn't shake the image of Lila Dawson standing alone in the control room, facing down an army of guards. He had seen what she was capable of, how easily she disabled Dylan with just a touch, but he still wondered if it would be enough. Could one person really hold off so many? And why had she stayed behind? Was it guilt, duty, or something else? Entirely. As they reached the edge of the compound where the razor wire fence loomed tall and menacing, Ryan paused to catch his breath. His lungs burned, and his legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to focus. "We need to cut through," he said, gesturing toward the fence. Marcus nodded, pulling a pair of bolt cutters from his jacket. They had planned this part carefully, knowing the fence would be their biggest obstacle. As Marcus worked on cutting a hole large enough for them to slip through, Ryan scanned the area, half expecting guards to appear at any moment. Finally, the wire gave way, and they squeezed through, emerging into the vast, snow-covered wilderness beyond. For a brief moment, Ryan allowed himself to feel hope. Freedom was within reach. All they had to do was keep moving. But then reality set in. "Where do we go now?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "There's nothing out here but ice and death." Ryan glanced around, realizing Marcus was right. The Alaskan tundra stretched endlessly in every direction, barren and unforgiving. Without supplies or shelter, surviving out here would be nearly impossible. Still, giving up wasn't an option, not after everything they'd been through. "We'll figure it out," Ryan said firmly, though doubt gnawed at him. "One step at a time." Back inside the facility, Lila Dawson faced her own battle. Dozens of guards had surrounded her in the control room, their weapons trained on her, but none dared to fire. She stood her ground, her body radiating waves of energy that kept them at bay. Her strength was waning, each use of her abilities draining her further, but she refused to give in. Victor Holt, the warden, arrived moments later, his face twisted with fury. "What have you done?" he demanded, pushing past the guards to confront her. "What needed to be done," Lila replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into her limbs. Holt sneered, pulling a small device from his pocket, a remote control connected to the facility's central systems. "You think you've won? This place is rigged to self-destruct if anyone tries to escape. You'll take everyone down with you, including yourself." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Then pull the trigger. See if I care." For a moment, Holt hesitated, clearly unsure whether she was bluffing. But Lila knew better than to underestimate him. He was a man who thrived on control, willing to do whatever it took to maintain it, even destroy his own creation. Before Holt could act, however, Ryan reappeared, bursting into the control room with Marcus trailing behind him. Both men looked battered and exhausted, but their determination hadn't faltered. "You're not going anywhere," Ryan growled, stepping between Lila and Holt. Holt laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "And what exactly do you plan to do about it?" "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched," Ryan smirked, glancing at Lila. "Maybe, but we've got something you don't." Without warning, Lila unleashed another pulse of energy, knocking the guards and Holt to the ground. It was weaker than before, her movement slower, but it was enough to buy them precious seconds. "Go," she urged, grabbing Ryan's arm. "No," Ryan said, shaking her off. "Not without you." "There's no time to argue," Lila snapped, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Get out of here while you still can." Reluctantly, Ryan nodded, motioning for Marcus to follow him. As they turned to leave, Lila collapsed to her knees, her strength finally giving out. She watched them disappear through the doorway, tears freezing on her cheeks as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Moments later, Holt regained consciousness, scrambling to his feet. His face was red with rage as he activated the self-destruct sequence. A loud alarm began blaring throughout the facility, accompanied by an automated voice counting down from 60 seconds. Lila struggled to stand, knowing she wouldn't make it out in time. Instead, she focused all her remaining energy on disabling the countdown. Sweat poured down her face as she fought against Holt's programming, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Outside, Ryan and Marcus heard the alarm and froze. "We can't leave her," Ryan said, turning back toward the building. "She made her choice," Marcus argued, pulling on Ryan's arm. "If we stay, we're dead too." Ryan hesitated, torn between loyalty and survival. Finally, he shook his head. "I'm not leaving her." Breaking free from Marcus, Ryan sprinted back inside, dodging falling debris as explosions rocked the facility. He found Lila in the control room, barely conscious but still fighting to stop the countdown. "Come on," he shouted, grabbing her under the arms and hauling her to her feet. "I can't," she murmured weakly, her legs buckling beneath her. "Yes, you can," Ryan insisted, dragging her toward the exit. "Just hold on." Behind them, the walls began to crumble, flames licking at the edges of the corridors. The countdown reached 10 seconds as they stumbled through the final doorway, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground, just as the facility erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave knocked them flat, heat washing over them as debris rained down from the sky. When the chaos subsided, Ryan rolled onto his side, coughing violently. Beside him, Lila lay motionless, her breathing shallow but steady. "It's over," Ryan whispered, staring at the burning wreckage of Black Ridge Penitentiary. But, deep down, he knew it wasn't. Their fight had only just begun. The sun rose slowly over the frozen tundra, its light soft and golden, painting the world in hues of orange and pink. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. Ryan Carter sat on the cold ground, holding Lila Dawson, close as she shivered from the bitter cold. Her strength was nearly gone, her body frail after using every ounce of energy to save them all. But she was alive, and so was he. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the smoke, curling upward from the ruins of Black Ridge Penitentiary, the remains of the facility still glowing faintly where fires lingered. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken emotions, relief mixed with sorrow, triumph tinged with loss. Finally, Lila broke the quiet. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan glanced down at her, his expression softening. "Because I couldn't leave you behind." Lila managed a weak smile, though her eyes glistened with tears. "You should have. You'd be safer without me." "Safer doesn't mean better," Ryan replied firmly. "Besides, you saved us, all of us. You didn't deserve to die in there." Lila sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "I don't know if anyone deserves anything anymore." Before Ryan could respond, Marcus appeared, trudging through the snow toward them. His face was pale, his breath visible in the frosty air. "We need to move," he said urgently. "They'll send reinforcements soon. We can't stay here." Ryan nodded, helping Lila to her feet. She wobbled slightly but managed to stand, leaning heavily on him for support. Together, they began walking away from the wreckage, leaving behind the place that had once been their prison, and now their battlefield. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the weight of their situation settled over them. They had no food, no shelter, and no clear destination. The odds of surviving out here were slim, but none of them voiced their fears aloud. Instead, they focused on putting one foot in front of the other, determined to keep moving forward. Hours passed, and the group finally stopped to rest near a cluster of rocks that offered some protection from the wind. Lila sat huddled in a blanket Ryan had scavenged earlier, her head bowed as she tried to conserve her strength. Marcus paced nervously, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Ryan crouched beside Lila, studying her carefully. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, her gaze steady despite her obvious fatigue. "I don't know. I've never pushed myself this far before. My abilities, they take a toll, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going." Ryan clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "There has to be something we can do, some way to help you recover." Lila shook her head. "It's not about recovery. It's about consequences. Every time I use my powers, I lose a piece of myself. That's why people like me aren't meant to live normal lives. We're tools, weapons, expendable assets. The program made sure of that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Ryan wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but deep down, he knew she was right. The system that created her had stripped away her humanity, leaving behind only fragments of who she used to be. Marcus interrupted their conversation, pointing toward the distance. "Look," he exclaimed. In the far-off expanse, a faint plume of smoke rose into the sky, a sign of human activity. Hope flickered in Ryan's chest. "That could be our chance," he said, turning to Lila. "If we can reach it, maybe we'll find help." Lila hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Let's try." With renewed determination, the trio pressed onward, their pace slower than before but driven by the promise of salvation. As they drew closer to the source of the smoke, they discovered a small hunting cabin nestled in a grove of trees. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, and the scent of wood burning filled the air. Ryan approached cautiously, knocking on the door. A moment later, it opened to reveal an elderly man with weathered features and kind eyes. He took one look at the bedraggled group and stepped aside without hesitation. "Come in," he said gruffly. You look like you've been through hell." Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the harsh environment outside. The old man introduced himself as Walter and quickly set about tending to their needs. He brought blankets, hot soup, and water, urging them to rest and recover. As Lila warmed herself by the fire, she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't running, fighting, or hiding. She was simply safe. That night, as everyone else slept, Ryan stayed awake, watching over Lila. He thought about everything they had endured, the betrayals, the sacrifices, the moments of courage, and realized something profound. This journey hadn't just been about escaping captivity. It had been about reclaiming their humanity. When morning came, Walter offered to let them stay until they regained their strength. "But you'll need to decide what comes next," he warned. "This land is vast, and the world beyond it isn't always kind." Ryan turned to Lila, waiting for her response. She met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "We expose the truth," she said firmly. "About Blackridge, about the program, about everything. If we don't, then none of this matters." Ryan nodded, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. "Then that's what we'll do." Together, they vowed to fight. Not just for themselves, but for everyone trapped in systems designed to break them. Their scars would remain, reminders of battles fought and lives lost, but they would also serve as symbols of resilience and hope. As the days passed and their strength returned, Ryan and Lila prepared to leave the cabin, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They didn't know what challenges awaited them, but they faced the future united, bound by trust and purpose. Somewhere far away, the ashes of Blackridge Penitentiary continued to smolder, a testament to the darkness they had left behind. But in their hearts, Ryan and Lila carried the light of redemption, determined to ensure that no one else would suffer as they had. And so, under the vast Alaskan sky, they walked toward the horizon, leaving the past behind and stepping boldly into the unknown. Days turned into weeks as Ryan Carter and Lila Dawson traveled south, leaving the frozen wilderness behind and heading toward civilization. With Walter's help, they had mapped out a route to the nearest town, where they hoped to blend in and gather resources before continuing their mission. But blending in was easier said than done. Both carried the weight of their experiences, visible in the way they flinched at sudden noises or avoided crowded spaces, and neither could forget the horrors they'd left behind at Blackridge Penitentiary. Still, they pressed on, driven by a shared purpose. Exposing the truth about the facility and the shadowy program that had created it wasn't just a goal, it was a necessity. If they failed, others would suffer the same fate they had endured. When they finally reached the city, the contrast was overwhelming. After weeks of isolation in the wilderness, the noise, lights, and constant movement felt almost alien. People hurried past them, absorbed in their own lives, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. For Ryan and Lila, however, every face seemed suspicious, every glance potentially hostile. Their first priority was finding shelter. Using cash Marcus had scavenged from the cabin, they rented a small, run-down apartment in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, a single room with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but it was safe enough for now. From there, they began planning their next move. Lila spent hours poring over old newspapers and online articles, searching for any mention of Blackridge Penitentiary or the HELIX program. At first, she found nothing. No records, no reports, no evidence that the facility even existed. It was as if it had been erased from history. But then, buried deep in a forgotten corner of the internet, she discovered a name: Dr. Evelyn Grant. According to the article, Dr. Grant had once worked for a classified government agency specializing in experimental rehabilitation programs. Though the details were vague, Lila recognized the description immediately. It matched everything she knew about HELIX. "This is it," she told Ryan one evening, her voice tinged with excitement. "If anyone knows the truth, it's her." Ryan studied the screen, his brow furrowed. "How do we find her?" After some digging, they learned that Dr. Grant lived in the capital, working as a consultant for a private firm. Getting to her wouldn't be easy. The city was heavily monitored, and both of them were likely flagged as fugitives. But they didn't have a choice. The journey to the capital took several days, during which time they grew increasingly cautious. Every checkpoint, every security camera, every passerby felt like a potential threat. By the time they arrived, exhaustion had set in, but there was no time to rest. Dr. Grant's office was located on the top floor of a sleek skyscraper in the heart of downtown. As Ryan and Lila approached the building, they exchanged nervous glances. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Employees bustled about, talking on phones or typing on laptops, while security guards patrolled the area. Ryan and Lila hung back, trying not to draw attention to themselves. "We need a plan," Ryan muttered under his breath. "I'll handle it," Lila replied, stepping forward before he could protest. She walked up to the reception desk, flashing a practiced smile. "Hi, I'm here to see Dr. Grant. We spoke earlier. I'm a journalist writing a piece on her work." The receptionist frowned, checking her computer. "I don't see your appointment listed." "That's strange," Lila said, feigning confusion. "Maybe there was a mix-up. Could you call her directly? Tell her Anna Bennett is here?" The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded. "Dr. Grant will see you. Take the elevator to the 23rd floor." Ryan watched in awe as Lila returned to him, her composure flawless. "That was impressive," he whispered. "Let's just hope it works," she replied, leading the way to the elevators. When they reached Dr. Grant's office, they were greeted by a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and an air of authority. She gestured for them to sit, studying them intently. "You're not a journalist," she said bluntly after a moment. "No," Lila admitted. "But I think you already know why we're here." Dr. Grant leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Blackridge," she said simply. "Yes," Lila confirmed. "We need your help to expose what happened there." For a long moment, Dr. Grant said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "You should know I tried to shut it down years ago. But the people in charge, and they wouldn't listen, they never do." Over the next hour, she explained everything. How the program had started as a legitimate effort to rehabilitate criminals, only to spiral into something far darker. Experimental treatments, unethical practices, forced participation, all of it sanctioned by those in power. "But there's proof," she added, pulling a flash drive from her desk drawer. "Everything you need is here. Names, dates, locations. Use it wisely." As they left the office, Ryan and Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had the evidence. They just needed to get it to the right people. But as they stepped outside, they realized they weren't alone. A black sedan idled at the curb, its windows tinted. Before they could react, men in suits emerged, surrounding them. "Ryan Carter and Lila Dawson," one of them said, his tone cold. "You're coming with us." Ryan tensed, ready to fight, but Lila placed a hand on his arm. "Not yet," she whispered. "Trust me." With that, she raised her hands, her eyes glowing faintly as she unleashed a pulse of energy. The agents froze, stunned, giving Ryan and Lila just enough time to escape. As they disappeared into the crowd, Lila turned to Ryan, her expression grim. "This isn't over," she said. "Not by a long shot." And with that, they vanished into the night, determined to finish what they had started.